Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Yes for the Environment webinar. My name is Emma, and I am the Yes Program Coordinator at iEarn USA. Today's webinar is all about the environment and how to make environment-oriented projects more sustainable and maximize impact on your communities. Before we begin, let's go over a quick review of some of the features in this room so all attendees can navigate and participate seamlessly. So first off, I want to direct everyone's attention to the chat box. The chat box is a great way to communicate with the panelists and myself throughout the webinar, but please make sure that your chat box settings are set to all panelists and attendees, not just all panelists. That way, everyone who's in the room can see your questions and can engage in conversation with you. We also will be using polls throughout the webinar. Polls are a great way for us to learn more about you. So let's launch our first poll. We want to know who you are. Are you a Yes Abroad alumni? Are you a Yes alumni? Are you a Yes student, a Yes Abroad student, or other? And just so everyone knows, we are also streaming this webinar on Facebook Live. So we will be monitoring the Facebook comments throughout the webinar. So if anyone who's joining us from Facebook has any comments or questions, please feel free to leave a comment right on that live stream, and we will be checking it and making sure that we respond to any of your questions. Great, so let's end this poll in about 3 more seconds. Awesome. And it looks like we have 13% are Yes Abroad alumni, 27% are Yes alumni, and 60% are other. So I'm curious to know more about you others. Great. And also one more note, we are recording this webinar. So if you missed something or if you just want to watch it again because our guest speakers have so much information to share, you can visit yesprograms.org and our YouTube page to watch it again. So before I introduce our guest speakers, I just want to tell you all a little bit about why we decided to host a webinar about the environment. So we noticed that there is a huge uptick in Yes alumni projects that are constantly demonstrating their passion for conserving the environment and developing great projects in their community that help people and that educate people about the environment. We have 3 amazing guest speakers for today's webinar, and we're so excited to learn from them. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to the panelists. So just so you know, the webinar will be set up so each panelist will introduce themselves for about 3 to 5 minutes. And then after that, we're going to go into a question and answer session with all the panelists. We have a number of questions prepared, but we really want our audience to chime in with any questions that they may have. So please feel free to use that chat box. So our first panelist is named Anna Wright. Anna studied abroad with Yes Abroad in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 2012 to 2013. She then attended the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she earned her Bachelor's of Science in Agricultural Economics and worked on many environmental projects, including the King Student Farm, the Slow Food University of Wisconsin, Wisconsin Bike Fed, University Bike Resource Center, etc. She now lives in San Francisco, where she works as an analyst for the California Public Utilities Commission on their climate change policy team. So Anna, if you want to turn on your video and your mic, and we will share your PowerPoint. And we'll just have Anna on screen right now. Great, Anna, so as we get that up, you can just go right ahead and start introducing yourself.
All right, hey everyone, I'm Anna. Like Emma said, I studied abroad in Bosnia in 2012-2013, went to University of Wisconsin-Madison for both my undergrad and graduate degree. I work at the California Public Utilities Commission now in San Francisco. So day to day, I do everything from regulate rates to working with utilities engineers to maybe evaluate the reliability of a solar plant, to developing policy for renewable energy procurement or policy for other climate change related issues in California. In college, I worked on a lot of projects. These are just a few. I was the finance director for the FH King Student Farm, where I worked very hard with some of the other board members to make the farm a much more sustainable enterprise. It was operating on a pretty ad hoc basis, and while we were growing vegetables for sure, it needed a lot more structure, and we were able to achieve that. I also worked for Slow Food UW, which is a food access, cooking, local food organization focused on sustainability. And I started a campus chapter of a group called Wisconsin Bike Fed, which is a bicycle advocacy and social ride biking community there. I also did a lot of work with pre-existing volunteer organizations on habitat restoration. So yeah, currently I work as a policy analyst at the Public Utilities Commission. And when I'm not doing that, I'm out in the community. So I'm a very active advocate with the San Francisco Bike Coalition. They do a lot of work putting in protected bike lanes. I also plant trees. I'm a certified tree planting leader with this large group called Friends of the Urban Forest. And I regularly volunteer at this community garden where I'm at. I used to be a barista, and so I hook them up with coffee grounds from my old coffee shop.
Awesome. Thank you, Anna. We're so excited to learn more about you when we get into the question and answer portion of the webinar. Our next panelist is Bakari Idi Mitili from Tanzania. He is a YES alumnus, and he currently lives in Tanzania, where he works as a tutorial assistant at the College of African Wildlife Management. He has a bachelor degree in wildlife management from the College of African Wildlife Management, where he now works. Tanzania is aiming at natural resource conservation, raising awareness, and environmental rehabilitation, such as tree planting, and Bakari has a huge role to play in that. So Bakari, I'm going to let you introduce yourself now.
Hey, hello everyone. My name is Bakari Idi Mitili, as Emma introduced me. I'm currently working as a tutorial assistant at the College of African Wildlife Management, Mweka. I was also a YES alumni in the year 2011, 2012, and I went to New York, and I was hosted in Kingston, New York, with my beloved family, the Lindemans. I believe that my strong love for nature started when I was a very, very young boy, or a very little boy, because I was involving myself in a number of activities concerning nature. Today, as I said earlier, I'm working as a tutorial assistant at the College of African Wildlife Management, Mweka. I teach modules, or I assist in teaching modules such as ecology, environmental policy, and etc. So I do a lot of things concerning environment. So here is a picture displaying some of my students, of which I was with them in the field. So these are some of my students. So the next slide will talk more of the environmental projects I do. And the picture displayed is of my beloved team. We call ourselves YEC, and in association of Saviors of Wildlife. So it is basically two different organizations. We have YEC, Youth Empowerment and Conservation Club, and Saviors of Wildlife all together. We work as one. We do conduct a lot of projects or environmental projects. So currently one of the basic projects, or one of the projects we're doing currently, is doing conservation education in secondary schools, of which the conservation education in secondary schools is focused on more themes, or on 4 themes. The first one, simply how to interact with the environment, or how to live with the environment. The other one is environmental sustainability, and the other one is basically on tourism, and the other one is basically on domestic tourism, I said earlier, and the other one is basically on the interaction, general wildlife, and general perspective of that. So on the next slides, these are some of the pictures displaying my projects, or some of the projects I did. So these are some of the projects, which was basically a tree planting project, which was conducted in Mweka, Moshi region, or Kilimanjaro region. And these are some of my team and some of the local leaders actually participating in the projects, as you can see in the picture. Next. And as I said earlier, we are currently working on conservation or raising awareness projects. So this is also my team. On the top left corner of your screen, you can see my team. And on the right corner, that's me presenting to the students the conservation projects I talked about, telling them more of how to interact with the environment, working with the environment, and dealing with the environment in general. More pictures on my presentation projects to the schools. So currently I've worked with so many schools, and I've presented a lot on conservation and environment on many schools currently in Kilimanjaro region. As I said, I'm an educator, and what I do is simply education to these people, the students in general. Next. Apart from the conservation projects or from the education perspective of it or planting trees perspective of it, I've also involved myself in a number of environmental projects or wildlife conservation projects like law enforcement and other related activities. As you can see the pictures, that was a giraffe actually down. We're trying to save it from a snare, which was like placed with the giraffe. Here conducting some environmental assessment, forage assessment, and in the far top right of the screen, you can see us in uniforms trying to do more of the anti-poaching activities. So I've involved myself so much in the issues of environment and conservation in general.
Great. Thank you, Bakari. And I see there's already been questions coming in to the chat box about the size of your team. And let's see, there was also what's your favorite project, etc. But we'll get into that again in the question and answer portion of the webinar. Our next guest speaker is John Tumani from Kenya. I think he is having some slight microphone issues, unfortunately. John, do you want to try? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Great. If you want to turn on your video as well, and I'll introduce you, and then we'll move right into your presentation.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so John is a certified water, sanitation, and hygiene professional. He is from Makueni, Kenya, a village in the lower eastern part of the country. He's the director of Hafadi Africa Organization, an NGO that works in wash, education, livelihood, and emergency humanitarian aid across all of East Africa. In November 2017, John was selected for the Young Water Fellowship program, a very prestigious fellowship. And so through this fellowship, John's organization is building sand dams, a simple and low-cost, low-maintenance water harvesting technology. So John, I will let you introduce yourself and your work a little more.
Oh, thank you, Emma. Hello, everyone. My name is John Tumaini. John Tumaini from Hifadhi Africa Organization, an NGO based in Kenya, working in Kenya and the East Africa region. We focus on wash, water, sanitation, and hygiene. And my specific interest and qualification is I have a background of commerce and economics, and I'm a certified integrated water resources management professional, and I also specialize in international business and administration. So to cut off the chase, my NGO works with communities in Africa and in the world. We aspire to go to the world in the domain of water harvesting, and especially in places where we can't have a regular supply of water. So we focus on groundwater harvesting, rainwater harvesting, and other environmental friendly ways of water harvesting.
Yep, keep going, please.
Yes. So basically, what happens with environmental projects in our NGO is that we focus on projects that bring the aspect of environmental friendliness, of course, adaptability, replicability, and acceptance by the local communities. So in the bigger picture of this relationship with water and environment, you get to understand that there are variables that cannot be dictated by the technical part of the equation, and that as a young NGO that focuses on vulnerable communities, we tend to bring an aspect of an all-inclusive matrix where we have what they call an implementation matrix, of course, that can be discussed on our escalation of this discussion. And our approaches on water harvesting as well attracted major interest from some of the great donors in this world. And basically what we advocate for as an NGO is everyone has to be part of the solution. It's not a one-man show, it's a collaborative aspect that in order to meet the demand and mitigate the suffering that people go through in search of water, of course, we have to come together, sit down, listen, and brainstorm on coming up with jointly approach to bring leadership from the aspect of managing the available resources, the level of planning on what to do with the meager and unavailable resources. Yeah, probably to expand more on the rainwater harvesting concept is, in one of our projects, we designed a project that has a rainwater harvesting system composed of 2,050 liters, cement with a canopy and hooked up to a common borehole to try to minimize the water that is wasted on runoffs and water that is wasted on unmanaged water resources. We also focus on supplying supply of plastic water tanks to public institutions like schools and hospitals. And we also focus on things like WASH initiatives, whereby we create an aspect called the CLTS, community-led total sanitation, where the community basically comes up with the ideas on that is defined with their problems and their needs. And then we try to decipher their needs to come to a common agreement. So it's what I can assure you, it's a very, very interesting field to work in. It's very fulfilling to me as a young leader to see that people can participate and become a common force to handle a common problem that we have. And remember that the pictures and the experience of water shortage might not be at your doorstep, but in a way, it will always affect you. So please, as participants and as dwellers of this world, I urge everyone, of course, to be part of this journey and appreciate the platform created by YES platform and US Ireland and Emma and the entire group. And I look forward to a discussion that will be fruitful, of course, and very enlightening and fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. Great. So now let's move into the question and answer portion of the webinar. And again, I want to apologize. We had a technical issue and we're kicked out of the webinar room, but we're back up and running now. So Anna and Bakari, if you would also like to turn on your videos, great. And let's get our panel started. So again, for any attendees, feel free to type any questions you might have. We've already gotten a couple in the promotion that we've been doing for our webinar, so we'll make sure that we ask those as well. There was a question about recycling and a question about community impact. So John, I'm gonna start with you. How do you first approach communities when you wanna partner with them on an environmental project? And how do you prove that your project will be of value to the community?
Wow, fantastic question, thank you. So basically, what happens in a communal setup is that, as an organization, we develop what we call a conceptual framework. These are concepts that is defined from the existing data on a particular issue like water shortage in our dynamics of Kenya and East Africa, for instance. Then we narrow down to a beneficiary community on the merit of the most vulnerable and needy. Then at that stage, we initialize what we call support systems. A support system is a more of a roundtable discussion like this webinar, where we bring on board partners. Like the community is, of course, the best partner. Then there is the funding partner, and us, the implementing organization. So when we go to the community, we don't go with predetermined agendas. We go into the community and seek to understand their way of life, seek to understand their culture, seek to understand their problems, and then decipher these problems in tandem or in comparison to our conceptual framework, which has been developed, of course, by a team in the office. So to answer your question, Emma, that what do we do to communities? It's a really simple process. We seek first to belong to the community. How do you belong to the community? You belong to the community by proving and by sharing and understanding their problems and living with them to know what is their agenda, what is their priority, what is their approach. And of course, there are communities where you have to understand that you will encounter problems like illiteracy. And in such scenarios, these informal meetings and field works help you to know where to go, who to ask, and what to interpret from that community. And then when you get that acceptance, and when they gradually get to know that I really care for them, they decide and open up and start giving you what we call open baraza reactions, where anyone can stand up in a communal meeting and then share what they think should be done and what shouldn't be done. From there,
it sounds like a lot of what you're saying is you go into the community and listen, right?
Yes.
Saying you speak to see what they want to do and what their priorities are, and then work with them.
Yes.
So important. Anna or Bakari, do you have anything you'd like to add to that question, or should we move on to another question? Great. Okay, Bakari. Bakari, this next question is for you. You've done an impressive amount of work with sustainable tree planting. What steps do you take to ensure that these projects are sustainable, and how do you involve the community?
Thank you very much, Ima, for a very nice question. I think for the case of sustainable tree planting or environmental projects, there are a couple of things of which we really have to take in consideration. One of the most actually basic thing we have to take in consideration is the locality, or where are we simply doing the project. For example, most of the projects I did them the southern slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro, or the villages around Mount Kilimanjaro. So I did actually consider a number of variables in a particular locality. So what trees should I plant in this locality? How long does it take for trees to be planted in this locality? Do I have water resources, or do I have water in this locality? So one of the most important things I actually considered in planting trees in this locality was simply because we have like 2 seasons of rainfall in this part of the world, or this part of the mountain. So we have these rainfalls which are actually on continuous basis, the 2 seasons. So the trees I planted were like very, very conducive for these areas. The other thing I considered while planting these trees, I did actually take the native tree species. And how did I get this native tree species? So I simply collected the seedlings found in these areas. We have these big trees falling down, the seeds, and the trees, all the seedlings actually grow, or the seeds grow to seedlings. So I collected these seedlings found in these areas, and then I kept them in a very good bag or polythene tube bag, in which I transfer these trees to the planting areas. So you can actually see that these trees are the native species of trees, or the trees found in a particular area. We also have good abundance, so we have a good amount of water in these areas. So the trees can actually survive and grow sustainably without any disturbance. That's why one strategy I used in case of planting
Great.
trees in
So
these
you
areas.
make sure that what you're doing is consistent with what is already being done in that community in terms of the trees that are growing, and then making sure it can be supported as well, right? There's no
Yeah,
planting a tree if it can't survive there.
yeah, one of the other thing I do, or to get community support actually in preserving these trees, I try as much as I can to involve the leaders. You saw in one of my presentations that I was involving the local leaders. So I was working with the leaders, going to family. So I find the people in a particular family. I try to tell them the benefits of the trees, what can we get from the trees and all that stuff. So altogether, the community support is very important in preserving these trees here. And we also do a continuous monitoring of the trees. So it's a very important aspect of it, yes.
Awesome. Yeah, and it's like sensitization as well. You can't just plant a tree or do an environmental project, but you need to educate as well. Awesome. Anna, I'm turning to you. You have a few questions. Oh, great. I'm seeing you're taking care of them in the chat box about solar panels. So if there's time at the end and you'd like to speak about that more, please feel free to. But in the meantime, I wanted to ask you about some of your experiences that you had in university. So you did a lot of work in college to restructure student groups into more sustainable organizations. Can you talk about the importance of creating a constitution or bylaws? Are there any good strategies you can share to create good bylaws?
Sure, that's a really good question. I think the biggest organization that I worked with, with the board to restructure was the student farm. So I was the finance director, and I took over the position from someone who pretty much just vanished, and I had to piece together the finances and an $80,000 annual operating budget from angry phone calls about outstanding bills, that sort of thing. And so I was hired when the organization had an outdated structure, an outdated constitution, and no one really knew anything about them. Bylaws are a pretty standard way to have a structure in an organization, at least in the US. I'm assuming that holds true in other nonprofits. They're basically a contract between you and the other leaders and the regular members of how the organization should be run. And we learned pretty quickly that when they're out of date, they lead to very chaotic hiring and disorganized meetings. So the administrative director and I decided that we cared enough to try to do something about it. And we worked together to rewrite the bylaws. We basically Googled, what makes a good bylaw. There are amazing examples online. If you just put in, you can read through, pick and sort what works for your organization. But the main rule was that it should be general and it should focus on the structure of the organization. And then, so things like, what role does the board fill? What is the student farm's mission? How are people hired? And how are big decisions made? So for example, how do you amend bylaws? Do you need a full board presence? And what sort of majority vote do you need? So we decided a 2/3 majority vote, full board presence. But overall, we just wanted to keep it simple so that if there were new positions in the future or fewer positions or changes, it could sustain throughout that.
So important. Thank you. John, how do you ensure that after you complete a project and you leave community, it will continue to have impact?
Oh, great question. So again, we go down to the point captured by Bakari, a point of the community. So we don't go to the community with all solutions. We encourage the community to buy in a concept. How do they buy in? On top of contributing on the conceptual framework level, they buy in this way. The community provides unskilled labor like physical labor. They provide security. And then we develop what we call community-based committees. These committees are entitled to the daily running of a complete project in terms of, is it working? Is it secure? Is there anything that as an organization we should be made aware of? And that way you get to find that it becomes more of a discussion and participation other than dictation. So we seek to create that link whereby we can contribute as partners, not just dictate as the bosses of that project.
Awesome, thank you. Let's throw a poll up for our participants. We want to know if the people in this Zoom room have done environmental projects before. So the question is for our Facebook viewers, have you ever led or participated in an environmental project? So the answers are yes, no, or I plan to soon. So we will let these votes continue to trickle in. I'll give you all 5 more seconds. All right, and I'm gonna end the poll and share results. So 63% say yes, 21% say no, and 16% say they plan to soon. So hopefully for those who said no or I plan to soon after this webinar, you'll have some new ideas from our panelists. Okay, and again, panelists, as questions are coming through in the chat box, please feel free to respond via text since we might not have enough time to answer everything using our microphones. So Bakari, this question is for you. As an educator at the College of African Wildlife Management, what do you find most effective in making youth environmentally conscious and responsible?
Hello?
Hi, do you need me to repeat the question?
Yeah, can you repeat out the question?
As an educator at the College of African Wildlife Management, what do you find most effective in making youth environmentally conscious and responsible?
It's actually kind of crazy how we human beings or how we definitely actually you think of conservation in general. So one of the basic actually topic of which is very relevant for youth to be taught in schools is what values do they get from the environment? What are the things that they get from the environment? This, if you get to teach them or to tell them what are the
Bakari, I think you might be frozen. So I'm going to pause this question. Anna, I'm going to ask you a question. And then if Bakari's internet comes back, we will ask him this again. So Anna, we're turning back to you for some more structural advice on how to set up organizations and how to capture some of that data. So you worked as a program evaluator for UW Extension, and you've done program evaluation with several nonprofits. Can you tell us what exactly program evaluation is and the importance of evaluation and strategies for small organizations or yes, alumni associations to do evaluations?
Oh, I'm back.
Bakari's back.
Now you know, Anna, the question that you'll be asked. Bakari will let you continue with your answer. So again, we're asking Bakari, what do you find most effective in making youth environmentally conscious and responsible? Okay, Anna, I'll let you go ahead and answer, and we'll come back to Bakari after.
Okay, so program evaluation. I really didn't know what program evaluation was until 3 years ago when I started taking classes in it. My mind was completely blown. It's a very simple concept, right? You're evaluating exactly what your program does and whether or not it's effective in meeting its goals. And yet most of the organizations I'd worked in had never done program evaluation. It takes time, it takes foresight, and it takes a little training. So it makes sense that as a startup organization, you might not do it. But wow, it has such a great impact. So with our student farm, for example, our mission was to connect students with land, community, where their food comes from, the growing process, and the environmental impact of farming. And our main program was handing out free vegetables from the farm every Friday at a central campus location. And like you can see, maybe there's a goals disconnect. If we're not doing the right education, maybe students aren't actually learning about our mission and really understanding where their food is coming from. So there's a very simple way to just evaluate that. We created a pre and post survey. You just make the same questions, and ideally you get the same respondents, but you don't need to. You can just have a big enough group. So we have, we handed out vegetables to about 200 people. So it's easy to just ask that number of people, even if they're different. And so you ask questions like, where is this food coming from? How important is nutrition to you? Can you afford nutritious meals, 3 meals a day? All these questions. Then, implement your programs. So outreach, talking more in line, hosting classes, running a visibility campaign, doing events on the farm. And then you ask the same questions again and you see if there was an impact. It's important not only for the board and for your funders, because then you can show impact, but it's also really great for your community, because the next time someone says, hey, who are you? Why are you handing out vegetables? Why are you using our land to grow vegetables? It's great to be able to share measurable impacts, like as simple as we hand out 6,000 pounds of sustainably grown produce, or did you know that we've educated X% of students on campus about where their food comes from? It really helps with sharing your mission and vision with the community. And I just recommend doing simple surveys. You can do it by hand or Google Forms, but it makes such a big difference in implementing an effective program.
That's awesome. Thank you. A lot of people are saying that's a great tip, or thumbs up here. And Anna, just really quickly, because we had a question about this earlier and we have another question right now. Someone asked how your experience on Yes Abroad impacted your interest, or specifically in Bosnia, impacted your interest in environmental projects. And someone else just asked if you did any environmental projects during your Yes Abroad year.
Yeah, I volunteered and participated in a couple. Our coordinators were super helpful in hooking us up with, hey, there's a trash pickup, or we haven't found anything, but let's all get together and do some litter picking up. We tried to hunt down a tree planting organization one time, but the meeting place had changed, and this was kind of pre-social media blitz, and so it was hard to find exactly where they had moved. So long story short, it was not as easy in Bosnia as it was in the US. I wasn't as connected with the community, and I wasn't the infrastructure for volunteering was less robust than it can be in the United States. So I think you take what you can get. It's always better if you're very well connected with the community. And I think for students who are studying abroad, their coordinators are an excellent resource for that.
Great, thank you. Okay, Bakari, do you want to give this question a try again? Maybe third time will be the charm.
Yes, of course, I want to give it a try again.
Great.
You said, what topic or what things should we tell youth in order they can actually be environmental conscious?
Yeah, encourage them to kind of make that mind shift. I should be working to protect the environment, or I should be more of an active citizen in environmental projects?
I think one of the basic way of actually achieving or making youth environmental conscious is simply telling them what are the values of the environment. It's kind of awkward, somebody just like doing an environmental project without even understanding what are the values of the environment of which is trying to work upon on. So the way we human being act is simply what values do we get from the environment, and what can we do in order to enhance or make the values we get from the environment go on and go on and go on. So simply telling youth what values can be derived from the environment, or topics related to what are the values derived from the environment, can significantly make them conscious. Like some of the values derived from the environment, we have like the regulatory values. I mean, nature, environment itself, like trees, etc., controls floods. They regulate the amount of water, like floods and all that stuff. We have also supportive services or values. They help in soil formation, nutrient cycling. We also have cultural services or other services, like people have some spiritual beliefs related to environment, like trees and stuff. So telling people all about this here, all services provided by the environment in general, can boost their understanding. And if they know at least something on the environment, they can have a very significant impact on the things to work on the environment. So one of the basic important of youth to know is simply what are the values derived from the environment. It can trigger so much of their doings in the environment. Thank you.
Amazing, thank you. I think today we're just having bad luck with internet. John just popped out. I think he was having internet problems. So Anna, I'm gonna ask you, oh, John is back. Okay. Hi, John. I'm gonna unmute you, great. So I know you were just in the chat box talking about funding, and my next question is about funding for you. So you've been able to secure some funding from bigger organizations through the work that you do with Hafadi Africa organization. And this funding has helped support some of your environmental initiatives. So what advice can you give to our webinar attendees who are looking at options to be funded for their environmental project?
Thank you, Emma. Funding is, of course, a very big problem or challenge for the young and youth-based organizations. But I have this to say. Funding is there. What you just have to do is, particularly in the NGO world, you have to be unique. You have to be very innovative. You have to be very competitive and very authentic. When you combine those four, then you have to scheme the donor market. You have to know which donor, which organization is interested in your kind of work. You have to know that, and you have to then to look for timelines on grant proposals. Then you have to compile a very competitive proposal and tell your genuine story. And please don't plagiarize. Don't copy a story to fit the what we call the global news section. Don't fit that. You have to tell your story as authentic as it is. Of course, you will not always secure what you want, but a rejection of a proposal doesn't mean your proposal was bad. It means that you just have figured out that there is a problem, communicated it to particular donors and prospective partners, and then you have to be persistent. As an organization, we don't apply just for one opportunity. On a daily basis, we give at least 7 well-articulated grants to different donors. So it brings together authenticity, hard work, competition, innovative, and then you will get these opportunities, and at least one of them will come through for you, and many of course will come through for you.
Awesome, thank you. There was a question that I saw about, let's see, sorry. It says Bakari and John, but Anna, I think you of course should answer this as well. How do you convince someone like me from a tropical part of Africa where there's an abundance of water and forest resources to be environmentally conscious? And I think this is a really good question because a lot of times people look around them and they say, well, there's all these trees and there's all these rivers and lakes. I don't think we have a problem with our environment. So how do you convince them otherwise? Anyone can jump in on this.
As I said earlier on the chat box, as you can see, some resources or some issues or some things exist as they are when they are in large numbers. I did actually bring up an example, like for the case of wildebeest, their existence in the Serengeti ecosystem in large numbers is one of the strategies which makes survive. Otherwise, without them being in large numbers, we could actually believe that if the population would actually significantly decline in the course of time, after some certain years, the population will significantly decline. So some things exist as they are in the large quantity or in the large numbers. Apart from that, we simply have to define what is abundance resources, because like most countries in Africa, we understand that agriculture has significantly impacted our environment. Like currently, a lot of fields or landmarks have been transformed into agricultural areas. We have very huge tracts of sugarcane plantations. We have very huge tracts of coffee plantations. We have also very huge tracts of other growth plantations. So we can imagine how much of this resource is being transformed from that we think is abundant to necessarily bringing these resources into a very relatively low level. So some things exist as they are. The large numbers really support them. If you significantly or if you slightly alter the population, will cause a tremendously decline to that particular population. So being in large numbers is simply a relative term. You really have to define what is large numbers. How was that environment before? How is it now? So saying in abundance is kindly more relative or subjective to some situations or issues.
Anna, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I just echo everything Bakari just said. I think you can't undervalue the biodiversity of any ecosystem. It can be fragile, even if you think, look at all these trees. Well, there's specific types of trees and they support different ecosystem services. So, yeah.
Great.
Just to add up, it's really hard for a person just without that much knowledge in like environment and conservation to tell that this ecosystem is very healthy. The number of parameters of which we really have to consider to determine if this ecosystem or this population or this community of trees or this community of environment or animals is healthy. We just cannot see it from just, okay, we have a lot of animals, this is healthy ecosystem. We might have a lot of animals, but they're all sick. Is that a healthy ecosystem? So we really have to consider a number of parameters deciding what is abundance or what do we have in relation to environment issues.
Thank you.
So what I can say on the same is that abundance is relative. And again, it goes back from my background of being specific. I agree with Bakari that abundance is relative. However, I want to draw your attention on the tropical part of Africa, having a lot of water per se, and then compare that to the current situation of Johannesburg in South Africa, which had quote-unquote abundance of water. But in the last few months, there has been utmost crisis. Again, you have to look at the parameters of you have abundance of water. What is the quality of that water in that ecosystem? Is it water that is well managed? Is it water that is as waste? Is it water that can lead to excessive erosion and stuff like that? So, I mean, these are a joint and a very vast topic to talk about, and diversity and abundance of water in tropical Africa as an organization that is interested in working in tropical Africa. It will be the next menace of how that abundant water per se is managed. So, I mean, it's a very complex issue, but as a person in the environment, as a person in the environmental domain, I agree with Bakari and Anna that in any ecosystem, we have to look at all parameters to rate it as healthy, semi-healthy, or unhealthy.
Great. Let's, oh, okay, wonderful. Let's put up another poll. Let's just hear from our attendees. What difficulties in projects do you face? What are the biggest barriers you face in developing environmental projects? And there's multiple choice, it's a multiple choice answer, so you can answer as many of these as you want. So we have answer 1, lack of resources. This could be people, money, time, volunteers, community buy-in, identifying community needs, or developing successful projects. So let's let this go on for another 10 seconds. Okay, I'm gonna close the poll. And sharing results. So 73% say it's a lack of resources, whether that be people, money, or time. 20% say community buy-in, 13% say identifying community needs, and 33% say developing successful projects. Great. There was a question earlier about someone from Ghana said, Ghana has been identified as one of the countries with a high rate of deforestation. If you were to be in this country, what would you do to tackle this menace? So since none of us live in Ghana, maybe you could talk about instead the approaches you would take to solving a big issue like this in your own community. And any
I think the issue of deforestation and all its related terms is actually a very complex thing. Coming back to the background, most of these communities, why do they cut down the trees? One of the basic reasons of these people cutting down the trees is simply they need resources. They need charcoal. They need firewood. They need trees. They need things to actually help them build their houses and all that stuff. So they have so much needs of the trees, as you can actually see. They have to cut down the trees. So one of the reasons why do they cut down the trees is because they are so much need of resources from these areas, which is some way or another is accelerated or is caused by poverty. So at the end of the day, the poverty and the increased population of people in these areas forces these people to cut down the trees. So you can imagine the link comes from poverty, the increase in population, people need resources. And if people need resources, they're forced to cut down the trees. So there's a very general link between this here. So to cut down the link, you have to actually implement some projects, or you should put some projects which can actually in some way or another decrease maybe the poverty. If you elevate the poverty, or in one way or another, you can significantly decrease the poverty, at the end of the day, you might have a very positive results. People stop cutting down the trees. If they don't have firewood, they have some alternative way of using gas and stuff. So people will rely on other source of energy and depend less on the environment and in general like that. Coming to another case, which is part 2 of it. Coming to the part 2 of it, education also. People sometimes cut trees because of illiteracy. They don't really know why do they, or what trees, what values are these trees. As I said earlier, people are very biased on or very selfish on ourselves. Whatever we do, we try to link it to ourselves. What benefits am I getting? If I'm getting any benefit from this, I'll try to preserve it as much as I can. So generally, you can try to tell them what are the benefits derived from the environment. Deforestation, you lack oxygen. There are no services provided by trees. There's no oxygen and all that stuff. Habitat for living organisms, tourism, you try as much as you can to link all these issues with the value they get. At the end of the day, you'll try as much as you can to alleviate this problem or decline it in a very acceptable level.
Awesome answer. I'm hearing a lot of things that were similar to what was mentioned earlier about listening, about talking to different stakeholders, about educating people as well, trying to find that root of the issue, and then multiple approaches to fix it. So thank you for that thoughtful response, Bakari. And someone asked in the chat box as well, would planting fruit trees help? And I think you go ahead and type out a response to that so we can ask another question. Anna, you had a question in here earlier. Do you have an example of a seemingly simple but very effective environmental policy you've seen?
That seems like it should be a very easy answer. Yeah, totally. There are so many simple and effective environmental policies. I think usually the simpler they are, the more effective they are, because everyone in the community can grasp that. So, for example, a policy of setting like a waste reduction goal. San Francisco, which has a lot of resources that cities around the world don't have. It's a very, very wealthy city, but they have a really great curbside composting program because of a policy that any organic matter goes to compost, any recyclable goes to recycling, and everything else goes to landfill. They recycle 80% of their waste, recycle or compost by mass, and I think that's very impressive. But I mean, cities like Austin, Texas just required that all restaurants compost all of their food waste. And, they didn't provide any subsidies for that. They just said, this is something you have to do. If you don't do it, you're going to get fined. Here is a list of contractors who can help you out with that. And then that way they did more of a free market, low cost approach. And it's very simple and it's very effective.
If I may, I think Anna just nailed it. The whole concept is keep it really simple. Just take the example of Kigali in Rwanda. They just have this culture of recycle and reuse. So if you have a plastic bottle, it's and any polythene and plastic material is to be thrown in the not recyclable bin, and then any other waste is to be deposited at the recycle bin. So, I mean, it is not all communities which will have that system, but in order to have effective approaches, the key thing is make it simple. Let everyone understand. Don't make it very complicated.
Yeah, I'm glad you just brought this up because this was a question we had earlier. Is someone said, not a lot of people recycle in my community. How can I get that started? Or compost or any these small, what we think are very simple, small steps. How do you encourage other people to do that?
Start it from your house. It's a culture. You grow it from yourself. You help your sister and your family develop that culture. Influence friends to do that. Then you will be informally creating what we call a chain of reaction, where one does a good thing, it is then escalated to the nearest person. Then at the end of the day, you find that when you start the formal call for action to have a clean environment, when you have internally initialized that within your circles, then you have a base where you can have agents of change, you can have actors, you can have volunteers on that. Then you can start as a team. Just don't write up and have a project timelines by your own. You will be very disappointed.
And I imagine you have to be very patient as well, right? Change doesn't
Very
happen
super,
overnight. It's little by little.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Also with the recycling thing, I'm from a area in Upper Michigan that doesn't have recycling, but you can encourage you and your neighbors to collect glass recycling and drive once a month, load up your minivan and just drive to the nearest plant. Like if that's what it takes, you can usually find people who are willing to share the burden. And if not, you can beg them, you can pay them, you can do whatever you need to do. But you can make it work if you're dedicated.
Great. It looks like we're already over time, and I don't want to keep our panelists later if you all have obligations. I know all of you work, so I don't want to make you late for anything. But if there is time for one more question, Edward just asked, as project leaders, how can you survive or thrive in a community where your environmental ideology might interfere with community political ideology?
Wow, that's fantastic. So politics, Edward, thank you for your question. Politics will always be in the macro environment, what you can't control in a community. So as an organization also, or as an interested partner, you have to learn to live and adapt with such system. You will of course be like in the NGO world, we are so much viewed as anti-government and anti-politics. But again, there are these people in those politics which control the power and authority. So you have to create a balanced matrix. You have to know to what extent to push to, and to what extent to lie down, and to what extent to contribute as a stakeholder in a community, and what to give as advice, and what to give as criticism. That is, of course, found in your structure. And program evaluation was mentioned by Anne. Part of what we do as an organization, our key aspect of program evaluation, we tend not to be anti-governance, we can critique. And projects have to go with timelines. And these timelines, as part of program evaluation, have to get permits from the so-called politicians. So it's an interesting way to interlink these things. And I believe, yes, politics are there, and you have to learn to live by them. And then finally, someone asked about gender composition in our respective organizations. My organization has a gender composition of 51% female and 49% male.
Just an add up on the issue of politics. You know, we people dealing actually with environment should not be static. I have these ideologies and they should always be that way. At some point, we should also be dynamic, try to adjust ourselves, switching the political ideology of a certain area. But they should understand in your mind that I have to accomplish this, or I have to complete this issue. So I have to plant 20 trees in this area. So whatever they say, you just have to teach yourself, adapting to what they need, as John said, and try to accomplish what you want, simply based on their terms and all that stuff. So we should be as dynamic as possible in order to attain these goals or conserve this environment as much as possible.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, the three of you. We're going to put a couple more polls up, but while those polls are up, do any of our panelists have any parting words?
Yeah. I just want to put out there that I think it's very easy to get discouraged when you're starting out on an environmental project, whether you're not getting funding or one of your partners dropped out of the project, whatever it is. I think if you just stay positive and you think creatively and you keep working on it, you're going to get there. And when you do that, you're showing people hope, and you feel less existential about climate change or these big, broad, terrifying environmental topics. You're taking small steps toward a bigger solution, and I think you just need to cling to that. And when you show other people what you're doing, they're going to start coming into.
Awesome.
Yeah, I just have,
Sorry, go ahead.
I just have a few words of ending up this or parting this thing. Everybody has a part to play in the environment. We all have something to do in the environment. So what I would basically advise, if it is me, I should act locally. I should act where I am, but at the end of the all together, act locally will have a global impact. So everybody is responsible for the environment. Not just me, we are all responsible for the environment. So we should all act locally for global results.
I concur with Bakari and Anna. And what I can say is my name in Swahili is Tumaini. Swahili interpreted to English is hope. So you gotta have your hopes high, and then you have to have the dedication, of course. And again, I encourage Emma and the team. It's always good to share such panels and have such young people and who are trying to make the world a better place. I believe we can have. I belong to the Global Changemakers Association, a platform where we come up with these ideas and probably decide on how to develop projects and replicate these projects to local setups. And then jointly we'll have a very good world to live in. But again, I say and I repeat, you gotta have hope and dedication to achieve what you want.
I can't thank you all enough for joining us today. And I can't wait to see the projects that come out of our YES alumni and YES Abroad alumni and anyone else who joined this webinar. I hope it really helps you develop sustainable projects that have a lasting impact on your community. So we encourage all of you to continue interacting with the YES program on social media. You can find us on our website, yesprograms.org or yesabroad.org, and you can read more or submit your own story about environmental initiatives on those websites. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Youth Exchange and Study, YES Program, and YES Program News, respectively. I know there was a lot of information in this webinar, so they are recorded. It will be on the YES and YES Abroad websites, as well as YouTube pages and Facebook. So again, thank you, Anna, Bakari, and John. It looks like thanks are also pouring in through the chat box. So we really appreciate you all taking the time out of your days to speak with us. I know I learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to reviewing the webinar and picking up on all those little tips that you all shared with us. So thank you. I will end the webinar now, but again, check us out on yesprograms.org or yesabroad.org. Thanks, everyone.